Okay, well, here with Catherine McKenna, who is the former Minister of Environment and Climate Change of Canada and chair of the UN Secretary General's new Net Zero Task Force for companies, businesses, and cities, and Fred Krupp, who is the longtime president of the Environmental Defense Fund. I'm Justin Worland, a correspondent at Time Magazine. And here we are to talk about methane, the last thing standing between you all and drinks. For many of you, though, many of you will know methane is critically important. It's the second most prevalent greenhouse gas after carbon. It's hard to say exactly, but it is more than 25 times as potent at trapping heat in the atmosphere as carbon. And so I want to start by asking the two of you to just set the stage and tell us a little bit about why methane is so important and what is the opportunity that we have in capturing it in the short term. So Catherine, we'll start with you.
I really feel bad about the drinks thing. We'll keep it tight. Look, we'll get into the technical part about this, but when you think about how potent methane is, and it is 84 times more potent in the first 2 decades compared to CO2. I'm from Canada. Any Canadians here? Yay, one. Yay! They should all be in Miami, better weather. But when you think about Canada and our Arctic, we don't have time. And just think about the challenge we have if we don't tackle it. And it's often underestimated. In Canada, we think, from the oil and gas industry, it's 1.5 times higher.
Well, the simplest way I can put it, Justin, is that right now methane is causing just about 30% of all the warming we're experiencing. But starting now, the methane that we're putting into the atmosphere from all sources is doing more over the next 10 years to warm our planet than all the burning of all the fossil fuel over the same time period. That's the stake. So bringing methane emissions down cuts temperatures immediately from what they would otherwise be.
Right. Well, I won't belabor the drinks joke, but it is critically important. I think a good session to end on. So let's just talk. I'm a journalist. Think about the news. I'm curious to ask about the Russian invasion of Ukraine has led to challenges with natural gas, and of course methane is natural gas. And so I guess I would just start with you, Fred, and ask, what does methane mean in the conversation about Russia-Ukraine? What is the significance of methane there?
Well, Russia invaded Ukraine the same week that the new IPCC report came out and said that we have to move faster. But we now have, therefore, 2 imperatives. One, we've got an energy crisis caused by the invasion. And 2, we continue to have a climate crisis that threatens all of us and all of our futures. And so some people say we can only solve one thing at a time, but we have to solve both. And let me give you an example. Right now, Europe is doing everything it can to get off Russian gas as quickly as possible. And Biden has promised in the short term, because they can't completely stop burning it immediately, the way their system is set up, that he will export massive amounts of LNG. So here's one simple thing we could do. How about the mind-boggling quantity of natural gas, also known as methane, that's being wasted by being flared and vented every year? It's in the United States alone, 35 billion cubic meters are being thrown away, enough to power 17 million homes. How about capturing that? If we capture that and send it to Europe, it will fulfill half of the pledge that Biden made to them, and we can do it according to the International Energy Agency. We can capture 75% of that at no net cost. So here's an opportunity to tackle both things at the same time.
Catherine, do you have anything to add?
Well, we're so nonsensical, right? The fact is we're wasting something that is actually valuable. And so look, I'm always hopeful that the market will bring some discipline and then folks will say, oil and gas companies will say, wait a minute, there's actually value to this, especially with prices being so high. But as someone who's a regulator as well, I know you need to regulate. Because there are other reasons that you can go spend your money on digging more wells. So I think that we really need to be focused on this. But as Fred said, it's low-hanging fruit. And by the way, when we're talking about getting to 1.5 degrees, every little bit helps. And you heard John Doerr talk about 0.4 degrees of warming. Think about that. We're trying to stay well below 2 degrees, striving for 1.5. 0.4 is a lot.
Right, so then to follow up on that point, let's talk a bit about how we get there, and I'd be curious if you could give us a sense of the global picture on methane regulation.
Well, I'd like to say Canada's a leader. We've committed to reduce methane emissions by 75%, and that's new and existing. But you've seen momentum, and John Kerry was really great working with the Europeans, bringing folks together with the new global methane pledge. So more than 100 countries have committed to reducing methane emissions by 30%. I think we can be more ambitious, but you got to start somewhere by 2030. And so I think this is really important. There's also a global methane hub, which provides support to developing countries, and I think we need to be doing that. Obviously, we have a huge challenge. And by the way, we're only talking here, we often focus a lot on oil and gas, but I mean, there's a huge challenge when it comes to ag. It's burping of cows, yes. But there's, I think that that's what we need to do. We need the world to get its act together, to stop delaying and work as quickly as possible, but also supporting folks in countries that may not have the technology or the expertise. And I know probably Fred's going to talk about, but we have huge opportunities now with satellites. That we've had a huge change with new technologies that can make a real difference.
Fred, what about the picture here in the U.S.? There's a lot on the table this year. Could you tell us, with regard to methane regulation, what's on the table? What's the picture look like here?
Sure. I think, the Biden administration is taking the issue seriously because companies have made a lot of pledges, but frankly, we are not seeing evidence of these emissions, this methane pollution going down yet. So it is great, as Catherine said, that out of the White House and the State Department, they got 110 countries to agree to reduce methane emissions. That's good. But as Catherine also said, we need regulations to make sure it happens. And so in the United States, last fall, the EPA, Michael Regan, a former colleague of mine at EDF, is now head of the EPA, issued regulations on 1 million wells in the United States, existing wells, to bring their methane pollution emissions down. What the regulations didn't cover, though, Justin, is the smaller, low-producing wells that are only 6% of the natural gas that we produce. But they emit 50% of the methane pollution. So we have to make that methane regulation at EPA stronger to cover these low-producing wells, because if you don't, you miss half or more than half of the methane pollution. And action's also happening at the state level. Just within the last month or so, the New Mexico governor, Lujan Grisham, issued preliminary approval for very strict rules that will also limit methane emissions. So things are happening at the state level. These federal regulations are crucial.
Well, I'm curious, both of you mentioned oil and gas. Fred, I saw you at CERAWeek, the big oil and gas conference, and if you listen to what people are saying there, they're talking a lot about methane, and they're saying that they're taking action and that they're capturing their methane. So I'm just curious, how do you hold industry accountable? Do you believe what you hear? What are your thoughts?
Well, whether it's the voluntary commitments or frankly the regulations that I've just talked about, you absolutely have to hold them accountable. And the good news is we're moving into a golden age of measurement, as John Doerr said just a little while ago, with drones, with planes, and as Catherine said, with satellites. So methane sat, which has been almost completely constructed now by an affiliate of EDF, the methane sat company, that's going to be launched on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. And once that goes up, it'll be the highest precision instrument to measure methane, and it'll be able to detect not only the big sources that existing satellites can detect, but also very small diffuse sources where a lot of this pollution is coming from. And it's what, President Reagan said back in the day: trust, but verify. And I believe that this accountability, this transparency, is going to be a big driver of progress going forward.
Catherine, do you have anything to add about technology, the role that technology can play in dealing with this issue?
Well, I would just start with the trust. I mean, I think that trust but verify is so important. When I was minister and we'd regulated methane, I was like, okay, let's just take the tech and just do it, and then tell everyone, okay, you underestimated, and by the way, here it is, and go to work now. And so I think that it is really important that we hold people to account. Tomorrow I'm doing a session on net zero commitments by non-state actors, so that's companies, businesses, cities, and that's relevant to this conversation as well. But I think that this new technology, I mean, that's the exciting thing, that we have really amazing new technology. And one of the companies, there's a Canadian company, GHG Sat, I am very Canadian, but it's out there around the world detecting methane emissions, methane leaks, and it found one in Turkmenistan. And so if you actually want to know where a lot of the leaks are from oil and gas, Turkmenistan. It's very old infrastructure, but they were able to identify this leak, pass the information on to the US Embassy there. There's no Canadian representative. And they, at that point, were able to work with the government to get it shut down. That was the equivalent of taking 1 million cars off the road. Like, that's the opportunity right now. But once again, it's great to know how big the problem is. And I'm actually scared, right? We're going to find out it's a lot bigger. We have a lot more emissions than we thought. But then you really need to see the action. And that's always the challenge on climate. There's just a lot of talk. I think we've made good progress, but now we do not have time. And in methane, we especially don't have time. So we need to use this new tech. We need to get the emissions out there. And then folks need to be held responsible. And they need to be provided in developing countries, as I said, with support to actually take the action.
I just want to follow up on that. I mean, there's a lot of known unknowns when it comes to methane. And you alluded to one just now. And I guess I'd be curious to hear from you both if you have thoughts about what we might be learning, in the next few years that, we have a sense of what we're going to learn, but we don't know as this technology advances.
Well, a couple thoughts come to mind. One, as the technology advances, people that are in places like Florida that are going to be hurt the most need to lean in the most and lead. Here in Florida, EDF has been lucky to partner with the Volo Foundation. They are leaning in and leading. And I think transparency, as people see what's going to happen, is going to inspire more action. Ideally action in our country in a bipartisan way. The second thing is that as we learn more, we're beginning to discover that some of the things that we may have thought were answers need to be thought about carefully. So let me just mention quickly, Justin, hydrogen. There's a big rush around the world to invest $500 billion or maybe $1 whole trillion in hydrogen infrastructure to do all sorts of things. But it turns out now that we know that hydrogen indirectly causes global warming as well. When it leaks, and hydrogen is the smallest molecule, it's the upper left hand of your atomic chart. It's the smallest atom, and you put two together, you have the smallest molecule. So it's what scientists call slippery. And what that means is companies that are now building this infrastructure need to measure hydrogen leaks so we don't make the same mistake we made with the natural gas infrastructure. We make sure we only use it in places that aren't going to leak, probably not in the distributed uses like to power cars and trucks with thousands or tens of thousands of canisters of hydrogen around. And two, where we do use it, maybe in centralized location where the opportunities to leak are less, we measure and make sure that we're building it tight. And so, yeah. Thank you.
They're like, you're done now, go. We're done.
Well, okay, well, great. We have a few more minutes. I'm going to ask just one maybe closing question. I opened by saying this is a big problem with big opportunities, and that's a good reason for this to close the session. But the other thing that comes to mind about methane is that it's an area where there's a lot of collaboration, perhaps an area to build bridges. And I guess I would ask if you both have thoughts about that. Is this an area where we can really build some bridges and make some progress that might not come in other places in climate?
I'm always hopeful. Look, I mean, if we're just rational about this, this is low-hanging fruit. Going back to what I said at the beginning, I mean, we need every degree or every, percentage of a degree so we can actually do what we need to ensure that we have a sustainable future for our kids, to ensure that Miami isn't underwater, to make sure the Arctic doesn't melt. And so we have these opportunities. It's will we actually use them? Now in methane, I think one, look, it's huge in terms of being able to take action really quickly. Two, there's money to be made. Three, there's actual technology that can help incent this. Four, there's global momentum, and including and good momentum in the United States. But we just can't, we just have to act, and there has to be less talk and actually more discipline in seeing these outcomes. But I'm hopeful, and I think the reality is that you guys are all here. You could be anywhere else listening to us talk about methane. I mean, Fred and I could go on about methane probably forever, but that's important. And I think that we need to get people motivated and educated, and so that we all are taking the action that's really at scale. This is action at scale. We can do it now, and it's hugely important. So in that sense, I feel optimistic, but as we say in French, lâche pas, never give up. Nancy Pelosi, just go for it, and I think that's what we got to do. By the way, she is so awesome.
We got a second applause line, but it's for Nancy Pelosi.
I know, well.
Fred, you have the last word on going
Nancy
forward.
Pelosi deserves at least that. I just think in the case of methane, it's really bad news in the sense that it's so potent and warming the planet so fast, especially in that first 10 or 20 years. And it's really good news in that when we cut the emissions from the oil and gas industry, from dairy, from landfills, from coal mines, those are the main sources, we can make a real difference in a hurry on the temperatures we otherwise see. And I think there is an opportunity here, Justin, to cooperate with oil and gas companies, with farmers, with municipalities running landfills to reduce these emissions dramatically. I agree with Catherine, the 30% target globally from all sources by 2030 is doable, and I think we'll be able to do more. From the oil and gas sector, 45% by 2025 in the next 2.5 years. I think we can do that, and we need to do it. The time for talk is over. Now we need action.
Great. Well, thank you. The time for talk is over. So thank you, Fred. Thank you, Catherine.